a period of time, I kept asking myself, like, what if I would have taken him to the hospital sooner? What if I would have done this? Should I have done this? And all of those things just continued to, that overthinking process intensified. All those are uncertainties, and the uncertainties is a lot about things that we can't control, and also about it increases the anxiety. And so I learned that those things weren't serving me.
Right.
So I started rephrasing my question of asking myself, like, what about today? Like, what can I do today? Because I can't do anything else about the what ifs or the should haves, but I can do today.
Welcome to Coach Soul, the podcast where we explore therapeutic ways to the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Steve Hudgins. I'm a licensed professional counselor dedicated to helping you navigate life's challenges. In each uplifting episode, we'll discuss mental health, relationships, self-care, emotional well-being, and personal growth. Join me and with my co-host, Kenya Evelyn, a therapeutic life coach, where sometimes we'll even welcome special guests to our show that share their experience and expertise. So let's embark on this transformative path together and discover a healthier and happier you. All right, welcome back to part 2. Stacy, welcome back to the show. So pleasant talking with you last time. And I want to continue because I feel like what you have to share is very important, because oftentimes people feel like, well, therapy is taboo, or I don't want to do coaching because who wants to be preached at, so to speak. And it's none of those things. So Stacy, tell us a little bit more about how we got into coaching, and then we'll go ahead and get into talking about what we left off last time, about what happens when we don't identify or we choose to ignore or self-harm in those aspects.
Yeah. Yes, I became a coach. I've been a therapist for 25 years. And after my husband passed away suddenly, almost 4 years ago, I added extra income and was doing some therapy, private practice, telehealth. And then I was always in a school as a therapist, helping kids with special needs and their families. But in the telehealth, I was finding more women that were coming to me with the anxiety, this dysregulated nervous system. And a lot of them had underneath that anxiety or that overwhelm. That's what they came to me for, was talking about, like, I'm so anxious. I'm overthinking all the time. I can't, sleep was definitely an issue, feeling like they couldn't make decisions. And a lot of them, underneath that emotion, was this loss that they had experienced, either through the funeral type of loss, or it was other losses like divorce, children all of a sudden becoming at no contact with them, or separation from a job, or even just another loved one, or loved ones moving. It was just some form of loss, and this loss of identity that they had. And that's when I decided that I wanted to help more people. So that's when coaching became this fruition of mine, that, I can help more women by going into coaching instead of staying in the therapy of just Ohio. And that's why I started coaching. And this dysregulated nervous system is definitely something that I see a lot of, because we aren't identifying our feelings. And our nervous system is, there to protect us. It's an alarm system inside us. If I open up my back door to let my dogs out and there is a bear standing in the yard, I want my nervous system to activate so that I know what to do. But what happens is that a lot of times, especially if we're dealing with something, a change in our life, and we're not processing our feelings, we get this dysregulated nervous system. It's like if we take a beach ball and we try to hold it underwater because we don't want to talk about, so our beach ball is our feelings, and we keep trying to stuff it, under, eventually that gravity of the beach ball, we can't keep it underwater for so long. Eventually it pops up. And that's like our nervous system. It gets activated, and then if we're not regulating it on a consistent basis, it becomes stuck and dysregulated.
When we think about, I think this is also multifaceted. So many rabbit trails we can take down on this path pathway, because oftentimes people will say they have anxiety issues that go into panic attacks, those type of things, anxiety. Sometimes they create thoughts that create the anxiety more. Even let's just take your situation. I mean, you're going through a difficult time. The whole world was going through a difficult time. It's almost like time stood still for you. And what were you doing in that time to regulate your own feelings?
Yes. So, I mean, one, I really started to identify my feelings. I learned to, instead of maybe at the moment, externally, I might have said to people like, yeah, I'm fine. If someone says to me like, oh, how are you doing? I'm okay. Well, that's not necessarily acknowledging my feelings either, but internally, I may have said, yeah, this sucks, or I miss him, or I'm lonely. So identifying my feelings was one of them. Then just some grounding practices in the morning with some journaling. If I had a feeling sometimes that I was like, where is that coming from? I started to recognize my own thoughts, because I had yes, I'm a trained therapist, but during that time, especially decision makings, I was like, what if I make this wrong decision? What if that's going to happen? For a period of time, I kept asking myself, like, what if I would have taken him to the hospital sooner? What if I would have done this? Should I have done this? And all of those things just continued to, that overthinking process intensified. All those are uncertainty, and the uncertainties is a lot about things that we can't control, and also about it increases the anxiety. And so I learned that those things weren't serving me.
Right.
So I started rephrasing my question of asking myself, like, what about today? Like, what can I do today? Because I can't do anything else about the what ifs or the should haves, but I can do today.
I want to kind of shred this apart a little bit, because I think it's important for our listeners and viewers to understand this concept, because oftentimes people who have trauma don't want to get into identifying because it's still hurtful. Oftentimes people say, well, I was triggered and I'm trying to change that terminology. I've got another book in the process of writing, because trigger, I feel like we don't take responsibility for what's happening.
Right.
Well, I call it stimulating of the splinter. What is the splinter that you own that's being stimulated to process and identify where is this stemming from?
Right.
Because we know that trauma overstimulates the nervous system. And so a lot of people are not able to self-regulate, because oftentimes children are not taught how to self-soothe, how to self-regulate. We think the baby cries, okay, here's a bottle, take care of it, right?
Right.
It's that concept. We don't learn this. But here you are trying to identify emotion or overthinking. What is one key element for a listener who is dealing with this critical overthinking and they're stimulating this nervous system? I look at it as a hive. You have an allergic reaction. This hive pops up and you got to scratch that itch so bad. That's how I look at this dysregulation. What is a key element that people can work with, identify, of how to slow this process down? I mean, box breathing, as a military personnel, you inhale for 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, hold it for 4, and you repeat the process. That can help. You got some people that just hyperventilate.
Right. So I use a lot of mindfulness. I'm trained in mindfulness and trained in somatic techniques. In my times, if there was times that I was really overthinking a lot, then one, I would stop, and ask myself if I'm safe right now. And the question was always yes. I was safe. There was no immediate danger. And then I used mindfulness to kind of ground myself. And I always like to use the senses because it's more concrete. So, trying to identify, things that I could see and hear right then to help me identify so that I could slow my thoughts down. My overthinking never really became it never interrupted my sleep or things like that. Sometimes I would just procrastinate on making a decision, wondering if I was making the right decision based on, everything. And once I was a couple months out from my husband's passing, I stopped the what if I taken him to the hospital and because that wouldn't have changed the outcome. The outcome was still that I couldn't bring him back by changing the way I thought. And so I started to really look at like, one, am I in danger right now? And then I changed a lot of the thoughts, because a lot of times our overthinking is truly based on things that we are worried about for the future, and we have no control over that future.
Oh, for
so
sure.
really taking a look at like, what can we control? And we can only control our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so when I work with my clients in my coaching program in the Anchor Resilience, I'm building them a resilience roadmap to handle future crises easier than they have been. And it's like an 8-step process. And one of it is truly looking at all of this cognitive distortions and all of this overthinking. But one step, thinkers that like are overthinking a lot, I tell them to give themselves permission. Once a day, you tell your brain you overthink during this time. If it's like 8 o'clock at night, once your day is kind of settled, and you say, okay, this is your time. And then I tell them, set a time limit. Don't go more than 10 minutes, because sometimes we start overthinking what we should be overthinking. And I tell them, just write, set a timer for 10 minutes. And at that 10-minute mark, whatever you've put on the paper is it for today. You're done. And you start to retrain your brain, because things get ingrained and they become patterns. And so we have to retrain it to know that we're in charge of our thoughts. A lot of times we think we're not, because our brain is so powerful. You and I couldn't have this conversation without our brain.
Right.
So we give our brain so much credit that if we're thinking it, it must be true. So we try to continue to find all of the evidence that makes this thing true, and that gets us stuck. And so I tell them, let's retrain your brain for 10 minutes consistently every day. You write down everything that you think about, and then you close it up. Close that book, put it away, and then you start to retrain your brain so that when, like in the middle of the day, if you find yourself overthinking, you say, no, I'm not going to do that today, right now. It's not a problem I have to solve. We'll deal with it tonight during our overthinking thought dump, whatever you want to call it.
One of the things that I wanted to add or share to elevate what you're saying, because it's so prominent. Stacy's talking about doing some journaling. And the first thought that comes to my mind is, oh my gosh, I got prying eyes. I don't want my husband or wife to look at what I'm writing. So I've often told my clients to go to Penzu, PENZU.com. It's an online, private, 100% customizable online journal. And so if you have prying eyes, you want privacy, Penzu, PENZU.com. No, they're not paying for me to say this. I just simply have ran across it when I was a clinical director at an inpatient hospital, and told them, hey, this is a way of being able to document and share. I believe it also helps regulate looking at where your emotions are, and they lump it so that you can see if you're having some ups and down roller coaster moments. Number 2, to help elevate with Stacy on this, is the fact that I modified Gestalt therapy. Gestalt has what's called an empty chair technique. And what I have found useful in recreating something different is highlighting what Stacy said. Document, journal. But I've also had clients write a letter to the person they're wanting to feel resolve from, handwrite it out, step outside, read it out loud. Obviously, if you don't want others to be around, find a place of secrecy, and then light the thing on fire. The ash and smoke gets carried to the wind. How do you know the wind is not carrying your message to that person? But out of everyone that has done this, they come back and they feel, 90% to 100% better. And it's because we are processing. I don't recommend getting on a computer on a Word doc, especially an email and typing, because you might actually hit send. Somebody finds something and it's going to be embarrassing. So deregulating the nervous system is taking that pause. Mindfulness research has shown that if you can sit at least 10 minutes in silence, focusing on your breathing, 3 seconds inhale and 6 seconds exhale, it recreates a synapses in your brain. Oftentimes, I will come home and not have TV or music or anything. I sit in silence just so that I can detox. And so for our listeners, if you're listening to Stacy and I, it's important to take 10 to 15 minutes because I tell you, your brain, you may think, oh, I'm not thinking about anything. It soaks in everything. The jackhammer down the street, the motorcycle that's revving up, the tacking on the computer, the air vent, whatever is happening, your brain is being overstimulated with your nervous system. And if you feel irritable, get with your doctor, find out what your magnesium levels are. Oftentimes when I feel on edge, I'm like, why am I so edgy? Well, how much coffee did I drink? That explains it. The caffeine robbed my metabolism of magnesium. So, Stacy, I hear the importance of being able to write things out. And you're talking about how to regulate your nervous system and, how to relearn. I believe that you also wrote a book on helping the listeners to identify with this book. You want to share with what you did with the book?
Well, I have not wrote a book. I have a guidebook. I have an overwhelm checklist in there, and I have some journaling prompts and a meditation that is on my YouTube channel. And it is a one way that, again, it's helping us, slow that nervous system down, recognizing what are some of those events or things that we might think about that escalate that nervous system, because there can be external stimuli that can create our, nervous system to be kind of elevated. But a lot of times it is these thoughts. And so our emotions that we don't process, is the other part of our nervous system. And so in that guidebook is, the overwhelm checklist really starts to tone in on some of these either thoughts or events that kind of escalate or get that nervous system activated. And why it becomes dysregulated is because we ignore the symptoms so many times. People play it off like, I'm not sleeping well. And they may, that just becomes their norm. Well, not sleeping well usually relates to our nervous system being dysregulated, which tends to be these unprocessed feelings or these thoughts that we're not dealing with. So many of my clients, when they're not sleeping well, sure, it may be hormonal with the menopause, with my mid-age women that may be going through perimenopause and menopause. So we take a look at that. But a lot of times when we get to the core, it's their thinking.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because we don't even talk about, the medical piece and mental health sometimes, especially in women's circles. And, women are great communicators with each other. But it's fascinating because I did have a female who is in menopausal, going through a keto diet that was also diabetic. And I'm like, you're a melting pot of destruction here. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you're telling me your childhood is normal. Your husband's verifying it in session and things seem to be A-okay with you. You need to go check out the hormone issue side of things. I don't like blaming it on hormones, but my gosh, these three things were depleting her serotonins. And so she went to two doctors and they thought I was off my rocker. And finally she went to her OBGYN and it's like, your therapist is right. So they prescribed her a progesterone patch. She comes back 3 weeks later and says, I'm normal. And I said, imagine that. Right. So we don't talk about these feelings and emotions that come over us. And it's like, I'm not trying to blame hormones, but if we're not eating and taking care, and we know the food is toxic in what we're eating today, but it's important to get exercise and grounding. When we're dysregulated, I know we say breathing, we say writing, but those are active. Instead of walking, what about grounding, barefoot in the grass, watching out for those landmines, of course, the dogs leave behind. But grounding is a good technique to help regulate the system.
Yes, it is. And, that's when I work with my clients too. Part of the resilience roadmap is self-care. And so I take a look at all areas of our life, including, nutrition, hydration. We're not drinking enough water, and hydration is an important key to regulating our nervous system as well. But I take in my program, I offer this self-care assessment, and we take a look at all areas of our life, physical, emotional, and the physical piece is, looking at like, are we getting enough sleep? Are we drinking enough water? Are we eating healthy? Are we exercising? And then, so there's all these pieces that will help, regulate our nervous system. And you're right, grounding. Now that the weather is getting a little bit nicer in Ohio, I do try to go outside barefoot and stand in the grass at least once a day. That allows me to get grounded with the earth. And that's the other piece that I work with is identifying moments in our day when we can put a couple minutes, because we are so programmed to keep going.
Correct.
And I don't know how many women I've talked to that tell me, no, I don't take a lunch break because, I'll eat at my desk.
Right.
Or I'll do this because if I get done, I can get out of here a little bit earlier, which never happens. So I talk about how important it is to put moments in our day when we can, I say you do take your lunch break. Take your lunch break. And if you can get outside, sit outside and eat your lunch and be very mindful of what you're hearing and seeing and feeling so that you turn off your brain for those few minutes of your lunchtime. But I talk about how important self-care is as well for our mental and physical health.
I totally agree. And we're winding down. And one of the things too about grounding is research has shown, swimming or just touching the ocean water with your feet, just the salt in the water helps. I found myself, I'm a guy, but Dr. Teal's magnesium salt baths tend to help too, to replenish the nervous system, to kind of calm down a little bit. And so it is important to find what works for you and being able to, these are just suggestions of what Stacy and I have done in our own personal lives, but you find what works for you. But in the end game, we want you to be able to find yourself to regulate. Stacy is also online for coaching and development of helping women who even gone through loss or hasn't. We're both here as professionals to help. Stacy, any final comments?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate being here today.
Well, it's been a great pleasure having you. And so until next time, take care. And
all right.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on Coach Soul. As we wrap up, we want to remind our listeners of a few key points. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content shared here is based on professional opinion but may not apply to everyone's situation. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making changes to your mental health care. If you're in a crisis, please seek immediate professional help or contact a crisis hotline. Listening to this podcast does not create a therapist-client relationship or personal advice. Please consult with your licensed mental health professional in your area. Remember, your mental health journey is unique. While we hope this information is helpful, it is crucial to work directly with the qualified personnel for your specific needs. Thank you again for tuning in to Coach Soul, and we'll see you next time.